Lawrence Lum, please.
So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful venue to present, and I'd like to thank the organizers for bringing me here. And what I'd like to do is start by telling you a story about pre-targeting multiple myeloma with CD20, and everybody in the room goes, CD20, that's really not one of the key targets. So Jeff Zonder, who's in the audience, we're writing a Leukemia Lymphoma Society grant, and one of the things that we actually do is we actually play Robin Hood. We actually go and buy drugs from the pharmacy, and then we chemically heteroconjugate them. So at that time, there were no CD19 138 or 38 antibodies available. So, but this was a proof of principle study that we wanted to just show that even if there were a few molecules of CD20 on the target, we could induce an immune response that then could be transferred in an autologous stem cell transplant. So here's my disclosure. The hypotheses that we were addressing were that an infusion of ARM-targeted T cells pre-stem cell transplant would induce immune responses to myeloma antigens, and these are other antigens, including SOX2, which everyone in the audience knows can be a marker for multiple myeloma. These immune responses can be then transferred and boosted with a stem cell transplant. So, as you know, what I've been doing is taking ex vivo expanded T cells using anti-CD3 and IL-2 and coupling antibodies together, in this case anti-CD3 and OKT3, rituximab, chemically, and then arming the cells with the bispecific antibody, washing all the excess antibody off. So all the infusions do not involve any infusion of antibody, but just antibody on the T cells. And then engagement of the T cell with the tumor cell releases the appropriate cytokines, and this is non-MHC restricted killing. And it was good. Adam already went through all this, so I don't actually have to talk about that. But the more important thing is at the right doses of arming antibody, you actually got a local secretion of type 1 cytokines, which will alter the tumor environment. Now, for those of you who are just interested in the chemistry, here's just simply using Trout's reagent and sulfonyl CC, which you can buy from Pierce for 15 bucks, and simple, straightforward stuff that's been well described. And I'm going to tell you that we actually did this with Herceptin because I'm going to use a solid tumor model to help illustrate how you can vaccinate and boost. So, but this is a conjugate that actually is stable. Now we've actually been doing FDA, QC/QA, and now we're good at 5.5 years of the original material. So we also did some 3D cultures, and I wanted to just show you this because I'm going to make the point that if you mix tumor cells and peripheral blood mononuclear cells in a Th1 cytokine environment and ARM-targeted T cells, and then do this in a 3D gel culture with purified myeloid-derived suppressor cells that you actually make, and then culture, and then assay proliferation, gamma interferon spots, and cytotoxicity using the various antibody construct ARM T cells, you can actually get these sorts of properties. So number one, ARM-targeted T cells induce a Th1 tumor environment. The ARM cells can block development of Tregs in these 3D cultures in both breast and pancreatic cancer models. These targeted T cells can suppress the induction of myeloid-derived suppressor cells in the 3D model. Infusions induce a systemic cellular and humoral immune responses that persist for more than a year. Infusions after stem cell transplant in non-Hodgkin's lymphoma induce a Th1 and IL-7 as well as CTL and gamma interferon responses. So if you were able to modulate the system, this tumor microenvironment, if you will, ARM-targeted T cells killing tumor, releasing unknown antigens that potentially could immunize endogenous T cells, and here are the type 1 cytokines that are actually released driving the system so that you have antigen-presenting cells that will then pick up the antigen and immunize the immune system. So what I want to really point out to you is that targeted T cells, as opposed to CARs, are going to kill tumor, release tumor, go away like kamikazes, and the antigens are going to be presented by the endogenous T cells to generate long-term central memory and effector cells. And I'm going to show you data that suggests both cellular and immune humoral antibody production actually occurred. So this whole process then blocks the ability of MSDCs and Tregs to actually thwart in situ vaccination. So we're going to push the system towards a Th1 pattern. So production in the T cells, pretty straightforward. Leukapheresis, arming ex vivo, cryopreservation. We can cryopreserve, and then the ARM-targeted T cells maintain their cytotoxicity so that we can do multiple infusions depending on the timing of the protocol, and again, to vaccinate the patient. So I'm going to talk to you about solid tumors as a preface to the multiple myeloma story. And what I wanted to do is just focus on the fact that we actually had 23 patients in the phase 1 clinical trial. Note the breakdown between HER2 negative patients, and there were 8 that were 3+. All have had Herceptin. And in this protocol, whoops, I overdid it here. We screened leukapheresis, we expanded the T cells for 2 weeks and then kept them frozen for a week while we did QCQA, 8 infusions, low-dose GM, CSF IL-2, standard 3+3 dose escalation, tumor evaluations, and immune evaluations. So here's what we got. If we looked at cytotoxicity directed at SKBR3, you could see that pre-immunotherapy, there was some cytotoxicity that was there, and then non-MHC restricted straight out of arm PBMCs killing SKBR3 after 4 infusions and then after 8 infusions. Here you can see a Th1, Th2 ratio based on the infusions and then post-IT. And the important thing that I wanted to emphasize is that this ratio actually is maintained for quite a while, and actually we leukapheresis patients in that vaccinate and boost strategy that I'm going to show you in a second, and there was plenty of cytotoxicity left in the cells. Here's a before and after 7 months interval between these two. This is a gal who actually was a HER2 1+ patient who had obviously visceral disease in the liver and bony disease. And she had been progressing through Femara. We leukapheresed her, expanded her cells, put them back in after arming them, and almost a complete response. I would be trying to pull the wool over your eyes. There's one section on the PET CT that still had a nubbin of tumor that was left. The surprising thing is we got about 52% patients that were stable or had a PR. We did not have traumatic PRs. We did not have dramatic dose-limiting toxicities. We basically had chills in an hour and some hypotension at 4 hours. All of it was actually an outpatient procedure. And so the surprising thing is this follow-up, as you can see now, in the HER2 3+ group shown in the red line, here's 8 of the patients. We got 57.4 months. So I was really surprised as we were following this group of patients. The entire group was 36.2 months for everybody. And then the HER2 negative, which a third of which were heavily pretreated TNBCs, triple negative breast cancer patients. And as you can see, this is at 27 months. So what happens if I just showed you this 8 infusions? What happens if after 8 infusions we pheresed the patients, got their T cells, re-expanded them, and then did a collection for CD34s and did a stem cell transplant, and then put the cells back in, beginning day +1, 3 times a week for the first 3 weeks, and then 6 more infusions once a week because they were all frozen down. And these are cells that are not armed. These are ATCs that presumably contain the immune-reactive clones or clones directed at breast cancer. So now they have all the space that they can now expand into. And then if you now look at cytotoxicity directed at SKBR3, and this is before immunotherapy, and here is in the middle of the 8 infusions. Each one of these is a separate patient. There's 5 of them. And as you can see, if you pick any set of bars, you actually get an increase during the immunization phase, if you will, and then doing the stem cell transplant, and parenthetically, the activated T cells that were not armed actually killed anywhere from 30 to 50% at an ET ratio of 20 to 1. So once you put those cells in and you start tracking the patients here all the way out to 1.5 years, not everybody got studied at all the data points, but you can see clearly that there's transfer of CTL activity. This is chromium release in these patients. Similarly, if you looked at the ability of the peripheral blood mononuclear cells to produce antibody, either in the serum directed at SKBR3 by ELISA, or take the cells in culture and stimulate them with irradiated SKBR3s, you can actually get antibody formation directed at SKBR3 all the way out here beyond a year. So now let's talk about the multiple myeloma protocol, because we thought, okay, we could establish immunity against a tumor in vitro, or call it in situ vaccination. And what happens if we could give 2 infusions of ARM-targeted T cells directed at CD20? We did apheresis. This was the standard group of resistant and high-risk multiple myeloma patients. We gave only 2 infusions of 10 billion. Then we did immune function tests, and then we primed them and collected CD34s, gave them 200 milligrams per meter squared of melphalan, did a stem cell transplant, and then did immune testing as indicated. And in 4 of the patients, we actually had enough ARM-targeted T cells that were armed with anti-CD3, anti-CD20 to boost them. So now what we're looking at is immune reconstitution over time, which everybody knows that we have this sort of space and we don't expect very much immune reactivity early, but what would happen at 6 months and later? Oh, and here are the patient demographics. And the important thing to just highlight here is their status before, and there are 5 of them that actually went into CR. And you're going to say, well, sure, the transplant did the CR. The answer is, yes, we won't know about this, but it's provocative that they're in CR. Okay, and what about the data? So RPMI 8226, as I think most of you know, is a CD20 negative multiple myeloma cell line. And we picked that cell line because it will act as an indicator for other antigens that are on multiple myeloma cell lines. Remember, so we targeted CD20 in hopes that we would get antigen or epitope spreading. So here we are at post-immunotherapy. That's 3 weeks, and then the stem cell transplant occurred, and here's up to 3 months, and then here's 6 to 12 months. As you can now see, you're not getting a response in terms of anti-RPMI, and this is chromium release, and these are sort of lower numbers, but there's a wiggle if you look at all the data, and DAUDI, which is a CD20 target, K562 is part of immune reconstitution. And more importantly, if you look at gamma interferon ELISpots per million cells plated, and you can see here pre and then post-IT, and then at 3 months and at 6 months to 12 months after stem cell transplant, you're starting to get elevations. CD20, you're also getting a response to CD20 by ELISpot, and then over here, the NK response. Now, what happens if you look for cytokine and chemokine patterns post-immunotherapy and post-transplant? We looked at a whole variety of them. Just to highlight, IL-2 receptor and IL-12 were the only ones that were elevated. Now, as I pointed out to you, can immune responses be boosted after stem cell transplant? Here are the RPMI 8226 line. There are 4 patients that actually have been shown. Oh, let's see, I'm warning myself about being over time. Okay. Okay, so the important thing here is if you look at this 4 group of patients that got boosted, and the boost time is on the left edge of this box, pre-boost, if you will, and you can see that in red are the LE spots in response to the 8226, and in black are the spontaneous LE spots. So you know that the controls are there. Next is K562, didn't do much in this patient, went up, went down, and Doughty, which is a CD20 target, up, not much change, maybe a little, but no real change. So what about anti-SOX2 antibodies after immunotherapy and stem cell transplant? Here's pre-immunotherapy, again, the 2 infusions, and then post, there's a shift in serum anti-SOX2 antibodies done by ELISA in terms of a readout in nanograms per mil. As you can see, at 3 months, you're actually seeing a shift upwards, and it persists after being up there a month, but you would say, well, that's just carryover antibodies. So persistence at 3 months is probably the take-home message. So if you look over here in the right panel, what about controls? If you had a concurrent group of patients with immunotherapy and stem cell transplant, here's our study group. Here's a group of patients who had transplant only, so they both sort of start at the very low levels of serum anti-SOX2 antibodies. And here's post at 1 month, and you can see it's popped up a little bit. Stem cell transplant only, no movement, and immunotherapy plus stem cell transplant at 3 months post, it's up. At 3 months post in the control group, it's not moved. Okay? So do the gamma interferon spots and anti-SOX2 antibodies potentially correlate with clinical outcomes? And obviously, the numbers are too small to really speak to statistical significance, but here are the group. Here are the 5 patients who relapsed, and if you look at fold increase in gamma interferon LE spots, you can see here that the fold increase into what we sort of said, well, maybe as a normal range or headed towards a normal range, 5-fold increase. There's only 1 that made that, and those who remained free of disease, there's 5 of them who actually made the cutoff. And more interesting is the serum anti-SOX2 antibodies on the right panel. If you look at 5 relapse patients before study, and this is a log scale, that's 1, 10, 100, 1,000. And as you can see, the pre-study median is really quite low, and the 3-month post is still pretty low. I can tell you this dashed line is 28 nanograms per mil, and the pre-study gang is close to that. And after, at 3 months, the post-transplant non-relapse patients went higher. So in summary, the infusions of CD20-armed targeted T cells can induce an anti-myeloma CD20 and NK activity that can be transferred and boosted. 5 of 9 had VGPR, PR disease at the time of transplant, and are now CRs, and 2 of 3 who had CR still in CR. The enhanced immune responses after transplant suggest immune responses that may protect against progression. CD20 targeting obviously is not the best target. It may be better to target others, 38, 19, 138. A strategy to vaccinate and boost may benefit multiple myeloma patients with high risk of refractory disease. And those who made it happen, particularly those in the laboratory as well as the stem cell transplant program, and Dr. Zahner, who is the PI of the protocol, and the lab staff in the GMP facility, as well as the clinical staff who had to coordinate all the patients that were coming onto trial. And obviously, it couldn't have been done without support from the NIH Leukemia Lymphoma Society. Thank you.